Once upon a time, in the small, quiet town of Enugu, there was a family that everyone admired. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor were kind, hardworking parents, and their children, Amara and Mako, were the pride of the neighborhood. Amara was the older child, a cheerful girl with a smile that could light up a dark room. Mako, the quiet one, followed his sister everywhere like her shadow. If Amara laughed, Mako laughed too. If she cried, he wiped her tears. They were inseparable. Their parents were busy people, always working to provide for the family. Most afternoons, Amara and Mako were left alone in the house. They would play games, tell stories, and sometimes just sit together in silence. At night, they even shared the same bed, whispering to each other about their dreams and fears. One afternoon, Mako ran into Amara's room with excitement in his eyes. "Amara, see what I have," he said, holding up a shiny smartphone. Their father had bought it for him recently. Mako had taken it to school that day, and some older boys had shown him how to visit strange places on the internet, such as websites only meant for adults. "What is it?" Amara asked, curious as ever. "Come and see," Mako replied, climbing onto her bed. He opened the phone and showed her a video. The screen was filled with strange images of grown-ups doing things neither of them understood. Amara frowned at first. "What are they doing?" she asked. "I don't know," Mako said, giggling, "but it's funny. It's making me feel good. Let's watch more," he added, smiling gently. "Me too. My body is feeling sweet," Amara responded, focusing more on the phone screen. And so they did. At first, it was just curiosity, like watching a strange animal in the forest. They didn't understand what they were seeing, but they couldn't stop watching. Each video brought more whispers, giggles, and strange feelings. The more they watched, the deeper their bond grew. It became their little secret, something only the two of them shared. In the quiet of the room, the Okafor children began a journey they didn't fully understand, a journey that would change everything. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The little secret Amara and Mako shared grew like a small seed planted in fertile soil. Every afternoon, when the house was quiet and their parents were away, they would sit together, staring at the screen. Each video stirred something new in them: curiosity, confusion, and a strange excitement they couldn't explain. One sunny afternoon, Mako leaned closer to Amara and whispered, "Let's try what they are doing." Amara blinked, her heart racing. "What if Mama finds out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She won't," Mako said, smiling confidently. "It's just you and me." Amara hesitated, her mind swirling with questions, but she trusted Mako. He was her shadow, her partner in everything. Slowly, she nodded, and they decided to mimic the things they had seen. At first, it felt like a game, just a silly game. Amara laid on the bed, smiling, and Mako positioned her well, just like they've seen in the videos. They giggled and teased each other, stopping whenever one of them got too nervous. From that first day, they couldn't stop. They continued every afternoon whenever their parents were not home. And gradually, they even started doing it in the night without their parents noticing, because they both shared the same room and bed. "It's a bit painful," Amara would say, but Mako, already enjoying the moment, would use his hands to cover her mouth just so she wouldn't scream out. However, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor would stay in their own room, sleeping, unaware of what was happening in their children's room. They believed Mako and Amara were having a good sleep, just like they too are. Little did they know, their children were in fact having a good time together instead of a good sleep. Years passed, and by the time Imara was 14 and Mako was 12, their secret had grown deeper than they ever imagined. It was no longer a game, but something they didn't know how to stop. At night, as they lay in bed, the weight of their actions pressed on their hearts. Amara would stare at the ceiling, her chest tight with guilt. "Mako," she whispered one night, "do you think this is wrong?" Mako was silent for a moment before replying, "It's just us, Amara. No one else will know." Their bond, once innocent and pure, now held them captive. They didn't know how to escape the web they had woven, and so they stayed silent, carrying their secret like a heavy stone in their hearts. The quiet house that once felt like a safe haven now felt like a cage. A few couple of years passed again. Amara had grown into a beautiful young woman of 18, and Mako, now 16, was taller, with a voice that had deepened. But their bond, built on years of secrets, remained unbroken. The once innocent games they played as children had turned into something far more dangerous. One evening, Mako sat on Amara's bed, his face serious. "Amara," he said softly, "I think we should use protection. It's safer. Let's try it just like we've been seeing in those videos." Amara's eyes widened. "Protection? Mako, are you crazy? What if someone sees you buying it?" Mako smiled, trying to calm her. "Don't worry, I'll be careful. No one will know." The next day, Mako went to the pharmacy, his heart pounding as he approached the counter. The pharmacist barely glanced at him as she handed over the small box. Relieved, Mako hurried home, tucking the box deep in his pocket. But as he entered the living room, he didn't notice it slipped from his pocket onto the floor. "Mako, what is this?" Mr. Okafor's thunderous voice filled the room. He held up the pack, his eyes burning with suspicion. Mako froze, his mind racing for an excuse. It's for a school practical," he stammered. "Science class." Mr. Okafor frowned, but didn't press further. "Be careful with what you bring into this house," he warned, before tossing the pack onto the table. Terrified by the close call, Amara and Mako decided to be more cautious. But when condoms weren't available, they continued without them. They told themselves everything would be fine, that Mako would pull out when he starts feeling it more. But the truth came crashing down when Amara, at 19, began feeling sick. She started vomiting, her hands pale, and some dizziness here and there. "I think I'm pregnant," she whispered one evening, tears streaming down her face. Mako's heart sank. "We'll fix this," he said, trying to stay calm. Together, they gathered their savings and went to a local clinic. There, they lied to a nurse, claiming they needed abortion pills for a school experiment. The nurse hesitated, but eventually handed over the pills, warning them to use them carefully. Back home, Amara cried as she took the medication, her body trembling with fear and guilt. Mako sat by her side, holding her hand. "No one will ever know," he whispered, though his voice shook with doubt. But it didn't stop there. The secret, like a shadow, grew darker. Each time Amara found herself in the same situation, they repeated the process, coming up with different lies to different nurses at different clinics, and even pharmacies, hiding their shame. Over time, the repeated abortions began to take a toll on Amara's body, though she didn't fully understand the damage. Little did she know, she was risking not just her life, but her future, as she never knew the side effects of the abortion drugs she takes. Their once close bond now felt like a chain, binding them to a secret that was spiraling out of control. Years passed again, and it was now time for Amara to find a husband. Amara was now 24 when she met Chuka, a kind man with a heart as big as his wealth. He fell for her almost immediately, and Amara, seeing a chance to leave her past behind, allowed herself to love him too. Ichuka treated her like a queen, and before long, he proposed with a sparkling diamond ring. Amara accepted, believing this was her way out, a chance to escape the dark shadow of her past with Mako. After the wedding, Amara ended things with her brother. "We can't do this anymore," she said firmly, avoiding his gaze. Mako's voice cracked as he replied, "Amara, you can't leave me like this." "I have to," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is my chance to start over." Mako was heartbroken, but he let her go, though the weight of their shared secret remained heavy on both their hearts. 3 years into her marriage, Amara still hadn't conceived. Chuka, eager to have children, remained patient, but the whispers began. Her parents, worried, turned to prayer, fasting, and even a prophet who gave them holy water to give the amaka for fertility. But nothing worked. "Let's see a doctor," Chuka suggested one day, his voice gentle but insistent. Amara hesitated, but she agreed. They visited one doctor after another, each one delivering the same devastating news. Finally, a kind but serious doctor sat her down. "Madam," he said gently, "your womb has been severely damaged from repeated abortions. It may be impossible for you to conceive." The words hit Amara like a thunderclap. Her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Tears streamed down her face as she left the hospital, Chuka walking beside her in silence. At home that evening, Chuka confronted her. "Amara, I need to know the truth. What happened? Why didn't you tell me?" Her parents, sensing something was wrong, joined the conversation. "Amara, talk to us," her mother pleaded. The pressure was too much. Sobbing, Amara finally broke down. "Mako and we started when we were kids," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I got pregnant many times and had abortions. I didn't know what else to do." Her mother's wail filled the room, raw and piercing. "Oh my God, my children," she cried, clutching her chest. Her father sat frozen, his face pale as if life had been drained from him. Chuka stared at Amara, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You hid this from me? All these years?" "I'm sorry," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. "I didn't know how to tell you." The once happy home was now filled with grief, anger, and silence. The truth, buried for so long, had finally come to light, and its weight was too much for anyone to bear. The air in the room was thick with silence after Amara's confession. Her mother's cries echoed, and Chuka stood in stunned disbelief. Amara buried her face in her hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Then, breaking the heavy silence, Mr. Okafor cleared his throat. His voice was low and shaky as he spoke. "I know this would happen right from the time Mako was born," he began, his words weighed down with guilt. Everyone turned to him, their tear-streaked faces filled with confusion. "What do you mean, Papa?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Okafor took a deep breath and looked at his wife. She nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue. "Mako isn't your real brother," he said heavily. The words hung in the air like a sharp blade, cutting through the room. Everyone froze. Amara's mouth fell open, and Mako's eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Okafor spoke next, her voice soft but filled with sorrow. "After we had you, Amara, I couldn't have any more children. The doctors said my womb was too weak. But your father's family, they demanded a son. They said if I didn't give him a male child, they would send me away." She paused, tears streaming down her face. We were desperate, so we adopted Mako the day he was born. He was just a baby. We thought it was the only way to keep our family together. We never meant for this to happen. Amara's chest tightened, her heart pounding like a drum. You lied to us, she screamed, her voice shaking with anger and pain. Why didn't you tell us? Do you know what you've done? Mako, who had been silent, stood abruptly. His face was pale, his lips pressed tightly together. Without saying a word, he turned and walked out of the house. Mako, wait! Amara called after him, but he didn't stop. The door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the room like thunder. Amara turned back to her parents, her eyes filled with tears and rage. You kept this from us our whole lives? How could you? Mr. and Mrs. Okafor sat in silence, their heads bowed. They had no answers, no excuses. What they thought was a way to protect their family had instead torn it apart. The house, once warm and filled with laughter, now felt cold and broken. The weight of two devastating secrets had shattered the foundation of the Okafor family, leaving nothing but pain and regret in its wake. The days after the confessions were filled with silence and heartbreak. Chuka, who had once adored Amara, now looked at her with cold eyes. He couldn't forgive the lies, the secrets, and the darkness that had been hidden from him. I thought I knew you, he said one evening packing his bags, but I can't live with this. I can't live with you. Amara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Chuka, please, don't leave me, she begged, but his mind was made up. He walked out of their home, leaving Amara alone with his shattered heart. Mako, too, couldn't bear to stay. The weight of the truth and the shame it carried were too much for him. One night, without a word to anyone, he packed his belongings and left. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He simply disappeared, leaving behind the only family he had ever known. Back in the Okafor household, the once warm and lively home felt like a graveyard. Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, consumed by guilt, spent their days in quiet prayer. God, forgive us, Mrs. Okafor whispered over and over, her voice trembling with sorrow. We tried to protect our family, but we only destroyed it. Amara, now alone and childless, spent her days replaying every decision she had made. The laughter she once shared with Mako, the secrets they kept, the lies they told, all of it haunted her like a shadow she couldn't escape. Her body, weakened by years of abortions, reminded her daily of the choices she could never undo. The Okafor family, once admired for their closeness, had been torn apart by secrets and silence. Their story became a whispered warning in the neighborhood, a tale of what happens when parents fail to guide their children and when secrets are left to fester in the dark. This tale is a reminder. No matter how carefully secrets are kept, they will always find their way to the light. And when they do, the damage they cause can never be undone. Parents, pay attention to your children. Teach them right from wrong. Protect them not just from the world, but from the dangers that lie within. Because once the foundation of a family is broken, the pieces are never the same again. This story is a warning. Parents, pay attention to your children. Teach them about right and wrong. Don't let secrets destroy your family. Secrets always come out in the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one. Thank you.